No ja.
You know, the Windows Forms has a part defined via code. And this part is typified from your code. You are just focusing on the functions So
Ty jesteś jednym
a
zobacz jak jest ten tutaj.
Raz, dwa,
Machnie, 4.
Machałem już raz.
6, 7, 3 osoby dodałem. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, teraz trochę, 20 sekund. Ale to może być, wiesz, kompresja zanim OBS wrzuci, zanim zrekwiruje, to nie leci live. Może być.
A w ogóle, zobacz, czy słyszysz jakiś dźwięk?
Tylko to może być sprzężenie, bo jakieś są robili podwójnie. Dobra, dołączcie się też, to będzie widać więcej osób oglądało.
Dołączam. Jest. Tylko nie można zrobić, powiem ci szczerze, wiesz?
Po prostu otworzyć stronę.
Jaką?
No tą z kanałem.
YouTube'a.
Z
którego Wi-Fi możemy skorzystać?
Pamiętasz hasło? For client usage?
Nie.
For general usage. Zapiszesz tu na razie?
No, zapisz. No.
Jakie jest hasło?
Które kojarzysz? My co miesiąc testujemy. Klientów, prawda? Potem ludzie już na wszystkich gdzie na samej konferencji był ten sam apek, nie? To inny seat, ale ten sam apek. Gdzie na samej konferencyjnej w ciągu masz wtedy podpiętych 80 do tego mobile.
Oh, and yeah, and the way how
Tak, tam coś powiedz.
Stoję tu i coś mówię.
And then they also communicate with each other. It's a madness. And when I think about it, but there is no
Nie, spokojnie. No i tak myślę. 28 osób. Raz, dwa, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Co?
0, duże U. I tak mi się no, 0. To nagrywam płat dzisiaj.
Kurde, gdzieś to teraz ci jasno kiedyś siedział do mikrofonu. Mamy ten taki, ten list?
Ale ten
Yeah.
But I would love to see multiple framework domain that would work in PowerShell. Maybe we should start with 6.
Masz.
It's too late to apologize.
Za 4 godziny.
Znajdziesz potem
Tak bym miał wyraźny widok, tak.
Sorry? I think
Mateusz went
downstairs
for
to bring
some guys.
Okay.
You gonna go for a job?
Yeah.
Is this on record?
Czekajcie na to, że wybrać się miałem.
Szczerze, spotkali z roboczym. Pan uważa, że jest wspaniałe, żeby nie dlatego, że
To ja dzisiaj
miałem jakiś taki w głowie,
nazywa się najważniejszy okres w firmie, że raz stany się podłączają.
Znaczy niby dość podobne, ale także tak żeśmy mieli w planu gdzieś tam do Wrocławia.
Tak?
Tak, jest, że nie będzie już, że dobra, nie jedziemy, bo nie ma czasu.
Nie, nawet na
Tam
LinkedInie
na spotkanie musimy jechać.
pisałem, ale spokojnie.
Że rodzina teraz
Jak
sobie
ktoś
śmiga
ma
po
pozycję dla admina, minus admina.
No jutro sobie mamy cały dzień.
Chętni. Na co zmieniłeś?
Mamy dalej.
Nie no, też, ale zawsze może być lepiej, tak? Zawsze może być lepiej. Teraz mamy trochę doświadczenia z narzędziami,
Tak, no ale oni w ogóle mają 6 tygodni tylko.
Ty właśnie Jenkins, trochę beta używała.
Tylko, że z drugiej strony mamy potem majowe, październikowe, wakacje jest więcej, w tym roku jest kilka
realny projekt.
przerw.
No ale
Przez to mamy tak naprawdę taką swobodę, że jak
ścieżkę z Windows Admina na
ciepłe kraje, to można spokojnie w październiku
i teraz jak jeszcze bym tak z rąk pracował i
baterie takie tygodniowe przerwy.
ci deworzy to teraz się
Super, bo tak jak teraz tego weź, koniec sierpnia, przychodzi wrzesień, potem następna przerwa, to dopiero możemy razem. Taka dłuższa. Którego narodzenia wrzesień, październik, listopad, prawie cały dzień.
I nie pytać się po prostu, nie bać się po prostu, nie wiem, zastosować serwerów z tego, bo jeśli muszą z outsourcingu i tak nic tylko 2, tak? No ale czwarta, no jeszcze
I think Jakub, this order will be way better than the other way around, to be honest. Because we know the start is like, okay, let's just write our own assertions, and then you say, okay, let's start from the beginning. That would make much sense.
Yeah, that's why we told you beforehand, right?
Yeah.
So, because I didn't do this one for the adventure events one.
Nie. Ten to oglądam na normalnie.
Aha, serio?
No.
który chciałbym
Sure,
to jest od chęci do stosowania, to jest nie było
So you can come up, you can again get some PowerShell.
To co? Sio? Ten, że będzie do mnie dzwonił. No dobra.
Wiesz, że u mnie po 7 czy tyle?
Fajnie. Sprawdzali, czy na pewno. I se poszli. Tak nie widać, jak nie widać. Widać mnie?
Nie.
Nie widać.
Tak?
20
sekund opóźnienia.
A na Teamsach nie widać? Tak, to jest dziwne, wiecie? YouTube zmienił teraz, że trzeba mieć 1000 subskrybentów, żeby z komórki puszczać i dziwne później jest. Teraz okay, so I'll first invite them, welcome them in Polish and then switch back to you, okay?
You can present it if you want.
Present what?
The presentation.
Okay, just a minute, okay? Hold on. Cześć, witam wszystkich, youtuberów, internetowców i teamsowców również. Udało nam się w końcu spotkać po równo 6 miesiącach. Ostatnie spotkanie mieliśmy w lutym. Mamy sierpień, wynikło to z różnych prywatnych elementów, które nie pozwoliły nam się zebrać wcześniej. Niemniej cieszę się, że udało nam się zebrać tak jak rok temu w szacownym gronie. Udało nam się złapać Bartka, udało nam się złapać Kubę. Dzisiaj zrobimy małą wojnę pesterową. Może nie wojnę, ale bitwę pesterową dla tych, którzy chcą się dowiedzieć czegoś o Pesterze. Idealna sesja, Jakub wprowadzi nas w podstawę Pestera, a Bartek pokaże, jak to wykorzystać, żeby nie być niechlujnym w kodzie. Jestem bardzo ciekaw jego sesji, bo dużo dobrego słyszałem po Dubsugu, gdzie to pokazał. Także cieszę się, że udało mi się ich spotkać i zebrać. Chciałem jednego pana wywołać do tablicy, ale prosił, żeby dzisiaj tego nie robić.
Nie?
To opowiem później już po kamerze. I tak Cię wywołam, tak Cię wywołam. Tak czy inaczej cieszę się bardzo, że wszyscy udało Wam się tutaj dotrzeć, że jesteśmy i przekazuję głos Jakubowi. Jakub, please, welcome.
If you guys want to bunch up in the middle, it might be better, because you can see better. No worries. I don't bite
Too much.
too much. And you will also need to come here and do some coding, so
Sure, why not?
the closer you will be, the better.
I have long hands.
You have long hands?
Yes.
Okay.
Arms, actually.
We will see. So hello, I'm Jakub. I'm one of the owners of the Pester framework. And today I want to give you a quick introduction to Pester to show you the basic keywords, how to use them. There will be some practicalities, so you will see how to use the framework itself, and then we can go on to the second presentation and see how to use it in real life and how to create our own should assertions, right? Right, awesome. I turned the transcript off because it was super annoying, or people told me it's distracting. So you can follow me on Twitter if you don't do already under NoHVND or PSPester. If you have questions, you can just send me an email or just reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open. Or you can go to the PowerShell Slack channel, and I'm usually there in the testing channel. So all of those options are open for you. Also, there are issues on GitHub. So let's start with introduction to Pester. We will go from the first concepts to mocking in roughly 1 hour. So what is Pester? Pester is a testing framework that started as a tiny project and became the de facto standard for testing in PowerShell. And so it's originally authored by Scott Mutz, where all credit goes to him. Then a lot of other awesome people picked it up, especially Dave Wyatt. He really pushed the framework forward. And also at that time, I joined and we tried to popularize it, and suddenly everybody was using it. Right now, when we go to when I go to PowerShell Conf Europe, I can see it mentioned in pretty much every talk, which is an awesome feeling. So thanks to everyone for using it, especially for people on YouTube and here as well, because why not? And yeah, so it's a testing framework for PowerShell. PowerShell itself is also using Pester to be tested by it. And I also want to tell you how I started. So I said I joined the project a while ago, and at that time, I didn't have any idea what testing is. Like, I was working on a project, I was writing some code for a week, then 2 weeks, then a month, and then I realized, okay, nothing is working. So what do? I tested manually, right? So I did that, and it was super annoying, and I had really hard time getting it to work. And then I thought, okay, I heard about this thing that's called unit testing, so that's what the developers do, right? So I always thought, like, yeah, development might be something I might do in the future, so let's try to learn about it and so on. So I started reading a book, and then I started looking in Google for unit testing and PowerShell, and there were like 3 frameworks at that time. One of them was Pester. Pester was the most feature complete, so I just chose that one and stick with it, and now I own it, which is awesome. But the lesson for you is that I also started from like an absolute zero, and the framework was already working. And my first commit to Pester is changing colors so you can see them better on white background. And then I learned how to use it, and then I learned how it works internally, and then I started adding code and new features and maintaining the project. But it was all a gradual process. So if after this session you don't understand how everything works, it's no problem. You can just pick it up, find some problem that you want to solve with PowerShell and with Pester, and just try it. Write a test, then complete it, write another test, then complete it. Then you will face mocking, then you will start using mocking, then you will master mocking, and then you will master Pester, and that's it. So testing is really simple unless you make it difficult, and that's kind of the idea here. Because a testing script should be just a long list of simple statements and then the script itself that you're testing should be complex, but not the tests. Because the tests will always just say, like, this is an elephant, the elephant is gray, that's one test. The elephant has 4 legs, that's another test. The elephant has ears, that's a third test. But it never says like something super complex, it just says simple statements that need to pass, and when all of them pass, then you get something as complex as an elephant. So that brings us to theory of testing, and I want to kind of skip that because we can talk about cyclomatic complexity and blah 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 and TDD and so on, but let's just think about one thing. All there is to testing is pretty much if this, then that. You have some input and you are expecting some output. And then if the function does the right thing, you will get the right output for the right input, right? And that's it. You just need to tell what you would do manually to the computer. So you just say, if I have this date and I remove 5 days from it, this is the date that I expect. You just write it down, you add an assertion, and if it's not correct, if the function doesn't do its job, it will fail the test. And that's it. So that's pretty much the good first step for you to start writing tests. To just do a manual test and then think about how you would formalize it in code. And then once you have it in code, you can repeat it 100 times in a minute. Not 1 time in a minute with 1 mistake as you would do it manually. And if you progress from this and you just write big tests maybe that reflect what you would do manually, then you get a good, nice test suite, and then you can start finding edge cases like, oh, I have null here, or this is returning something weird when I have only 1 item. And then you can also add that into the test because you can simulate it. So it's a progressive process, and just take it easy. If it doesn't work in the first try, that's why you have tests. So keep it simple and readable. So readability is also a major part of this because you will be reading the tests again and again. You are solving a bug, and you just have to go back to the test and you need to see, okay, this is like the baseline that I already have. This is what I should be testing, or this is what I already know because it's in the test. And for that, you need to be able to read it easily. So if your test has 600 lines, it's probably very hard to guess what is it doing. If it has 40 lines, it's maybe easier. But if it has just 5 relevant lines, then it's the best. Or maybe more. Depends on your test. So that brings us to installing Pester. So how do you get it into your system? So good news is on Windows 10 it's built in, but the version is really old and it brings more problems than it actually solves. So I recommend updating to do just install module, name Pester, and then you do force. You no longer need to do skip publisher check because I'm signing the module now. And there is an exclusion in PowerShell that says if the module is Pester, then just don't check the signature if there is any. No, it checks if there is a valid signature, but it doesn't say, oh, it used to be signed by Microsoft and now it's signed by you. So it stops freaking out because that's the exclusion, not that it's unsafe. It's safe. Still, it's pretty safe. So if you can, just update or install it this way. If you have the available version of PowerShell, which should be like PowerShell 4 to 5, 6, and 7. But if you have 2 and 3, and that's also where PowerShell is, where Pester is supported, then you can just download the module from the repository and use it that way, or use like psget. That brings us to syntax. So the first thing that we need to know about testing are the assertions. Those are the things that help us say, this is not how it should be. This is not what I expect. And so the should keyword is an assertion, and we pair it with a should operator, like be or throw. In my example, I have this very simple example where I feed a function with 3 hashtags. And then I have a function that's called replace hashtag with stars or asterisks. And then I expect that the hashtag will be changed into an asterisk. And how do I test that? I just say the input to should be 3 stars. And if it's 3 stars, it will not throw an exception. If it's not 3 stars, it will throw an exception. And so then it depends on the replace hashtag function if it does its job correctly. So inside of the framework, it looks kind of like this. This is the total gist of the function. There's pretty much just an operator. In this case, it's not equal. And then when the values are not equal, then it throws an exception that gives you a message. And that's it. You could write it yourself. You could write it yourself in the code every time. But because the internals are a bit more complicated, you don't want to do that. And you also don't want to have ifs in your code that are just boilerplate. You just want to put a function, because then you can test this function and you can make sure that this should be equal, works as it should. Wow, that was a difficult sentence to say. So once you have a failing assertion, you are failing the whole test, because you are the whole script, because you are throwing an exception. So you need to wrap it into something that will just indicate that the test didn't pass, but then it will go to another test, and that's it. So the it keyword is the test itself, and we can use it to describe what is happening in the code in like a normal language. So here I just say it replaces hashtag with asterisk. And so then I put the previous code inside of it, and if it fails, if it throws an exception, the it will catch it, and it will print a red message. If it doesn't throw an exception, it will just print a green message, and that's the test. And that's the testing framework. So the function looks like this, and you can really write the whole testing framework in less than 40 lines of code if you want. I have one, it's called P, because it's small Pester. Really? Or short Pester. So the function is called it, and it takes a name and a script block, which is the code that you are providing. So this curly braces are the script block, and then we just execute it inside of a try catch, and we dump the output, and we just check if we throw an exception or not. So if we didn't throw an exception, then it will go to the second line where we do write host green and the name of the test, or write host plus in green color and the name of the test. And if we catch an exception, then we write a red message out. Normally, of course, you would follow it with the message from the assertion, but wouldn't fit on the slide. And then once we have one test, we probably want to add some friends to it, so we want more tests, and we want to group them together. So that's why we have describe and context. So, yeah, that's fine. So here we have a describe, which is called replace hashtag. Typically, we are calling or putting in the name of the describe the name of the function that we are testing, but you can do whatever you want. It's just a free text field that you can fill out in any way you want. Then we put the test in it, and the test itself shouldn't throw any exceptions, so we just need to execute the code. So we get the message on the screen, and that's it. So that's how the test block works internally. Internally, it's way more code, but this is the case. And that gives us a pretty complete testing framework. But once we would start using this testing framework, we would soon realize that we cannot test a whole set of problems. And this set of problems is functions that have real-life dependencies. So if you wanted to test, for example, I grab a user from Active Directory, I check if he has a correctly formatted name, and if he doesn't, then I report a red message. Then you would always have to set up Active Directory, put the user in with the expected name, grab it from there, check the name, just compare the string to the format that you expect, and then write the message to the screen. But what you actually want is to have a function that will return the user, and then you can check it, and then you can report the message. If you're not doing environment testing, of course. If you're testing the function that is verifying the format of the username, that's what I'm trying to say. And so for that, we need mocking. So mocking enables us to take any function in PowerShell and replace it with our own implementation. So in this example, which for some reason is in a very small font, we have this antivirus service that we want to stop with our function. And so we write this function that's called stop antivirus service, but stopping an antivirus service is super difficult. So pretty much what we want to say is, if I call stop service with the correct name, then I believe that stop service, because Microsoft gave it to me as part of PowerShell, will do its job or throw an exception if it doesn't have permissions. So my job is pretty much just call it with the correct name. And so to make sure that I'm calling it with the correct name, I need a version of stop service that does nothing and that I can observe and that I can check, and that's what a mock is. Just a replacement for the function that is doing some counting and that is saving some filters that it was invoked with. So this simple test just says, I'm creating a version of stop service that does nothing, then I call my function, and then I check, did I call stop service with the name that's AB, standing here for antivirus. So in Pester, it works with defining aliases and defining functions, but if we wanted to do it very simply in our own testing framework, then we could just define the function, because there is something called function shadowing in PowerShell. So the function, if the function is defined closer to the call, then it will be resolved first. So we have this remove item built-in commandlet that would be normally called, but if we go to the function remove item and we define it here and call remove item again, then we would call the empty function the mock. And that's what the framework does for you. So you just tell it, define a mock for this, it will create a stub, define the function, define the alias, so PowerShell then resolves to the mock and not to your real function. It will add some counting, it will add some jumping in between section states and so on, maybe inject it into module, but this is the total gist of how it works. It's just function shadowing and function resolves. So it's no magic if you don't understand it right now. Doesn't matter, it took me a long time and hours and hours of looking into the source code and figuring out the edge cases. So don't worry, just hold on to the gists. If you want to replace a function that does something very difficult in real world, you probably need a mock. And now the practical part. How is the time looking?
Not bad.
I'm good. 20 minutes. So let's start. So who wants to write some code? Raise your hands. At least someone. So we will start with some context. When I was writing this code, I was writing scripts for this build server that's called Jenkins. And build server is nothing complicated, and you probably already know what it is. It's just something that calls some tasks, and around it there is some environment. And so the environment is usually specified as environment variables that you can use and that describe where you are running and so on. So maybe you can run like a PowerShell script that's setup environment, maybe some command script that's built in test, and maybe then just do some Docker stuff. So you don't have to really think about this. It's just the context for what we will be doing and taking tiny tasks from this and showing how I solve them with tests. And so Jenkins has those environment variables. They have the typical format with capital letters and underscore. I think that's called snake case. And we also have this semantic versioning, because why I was writing this was that I wanted to identify a Docker image in a good manner, so I can order it by when it was built and from which commit it was coming and from which branch it was coming. So then when I published a NuGet package or a Docker image, then I could have them order in the correct order. And it was super easy for me to like develop in between 20 different projects. And for that also I use this Git version tool, which just generates you a new version every time you push into your repository. And everything that you need to know about Git version is that it has JSON output that looks kind of like this, and we can use those properties to build the desired version, because I wasn't happy with anything that Git version gave to me by itself. So that's what I need to do. So the first task that I was trying to solve, or the easiest that fits the most what I'm trying to tell you, is just take a Git hash, which is a long hash, and convert it into a short hash. So this is how a hash of a commit looks like, and I wanted to take just the first 7 letters out of it. Right? Demos. So who wants to write some code? Somebody? Come on. Bartek.
I've written it all over the last few days.
You sure?
Give you a break. I'm on vacation.
It's really simple. So I have this test, and the test just says, oh, here's a long hash. You want to have this short hash. And you have this get short hash function that you will invoke, and this is what the output should be.
You want to regex it or sounds free?
I don't know. Just tell me. You can come here and type it if you want.
Dollar hash.
What do I do?
Dollar hash minus dot substring. It's going to be 0.6, I guess, or something.
You think you nailed it?
Right?
Did you nailed it?
No, of course not.
Let's see. Ah.
Close.
No, but we have tests.
Yes, of
All
course.
right.
Okay, so make it 7.
7. See, and it passes. So what if we do something wrong? Like, I don't know. Do you have any other approach that we can take?
Don't use net methods.
Okay. So what would that be? Didn't we have this conversation last time?
Yeah.
So yeah, how would you do it?
Reflect this as array and take 0 to 6 elements.
Okay, like a slice.
Yeah.
Do you think that will work?
We can test.
Yeah. See? So now we got an array instead.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
visual
array
afterwards.
and so just add the string type and it should work.
Like this?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh no. Because
it's,
then we
use
need-
OFS.
Yeah, then we would need to do like OFS is empty. But that would work. That's another approach. Or we can do
Minus join.
join, yeah.
Yeah, but you can do it on the other side. So another join.
Yeah, that's the.
So now we have 3 solutions that we can play with. We know that each of them goes to the right direction, the correct result. All of them will probably be the same effectiveness, kind of.
Okay, so when we are at this, I have my first question. The unit test of strongly typed languages like C# or some other, or C, are really strict. They don't only check the logic, but they also are very sensible to the types. How it transfer this to Pester, and how it affects a testing framework when PowerShell itself is loosely typed and the array can be string converted to string, the int to the string without any kind of special attention from the developer.
Okay, yeah, so just to repeat it, the question is how strongly typed languages or dynamically typed languages apply to testing frameworks, and how can we force this in PowerShell. So we kind of do in here, because if we look at this slide, in here, this is how the if actually looks inside of the should be. So we have the expected on this side, on the left side, and the actual on the right side. And if you know how this operator works,
Yeah.
then you know that it will cast to the type that is on the left side. So that's the reason why the expected is on the left side. So we can kind of
So it will catch
determine
the
the
type
type.
differences. It will catch the type differences.
It will, because we already did that as well when we just don't use the join. So what I was going to say is that we can force the type by putting the value here as a string, and that's what we want because that's what we expect. We expect a string. But if we just return an array here, then we will get an error, a failed test, because we got an array.
Yeah, can you show us how the hash .0.6 will looks like when you just select it and execute to the console.
This one?
Yeah, this one. Just
Right.
edit.
I don't think it will work.
Just pass an example string to it.
Yeah, I can do it like this,
Yeah.
and it will be an array.
Okay.
So it's an array, and if we force it to be string, then the OFS applies, as we saw, because that's how PowerShell works. But we can define the type, or we can force the type by saying, yeah, this is string, and because of the way it's implemented inside of should, this is how it works. And if it wouldn't work like that, you would get a lot of weird bugs.
Yeah.
Because then you can, for example, say, here is a script block and here is a string. And then you will cast the script block into the string instead of the other way around. All the shenanigans that you get when you can switch the sides, like in JavaScript, that I know you hate. But this is, yeah, the EQ operator isn't very nice if you are coming from C#, for example, because then it doesn't force the type in the way you want, it enumerates collections and so on. So
yeah, I mean, I'm aware that it's not the actual comparison, but I just I just wanted to know, after like 5 years of dealing with this, is there any cases where this type conversion gives, like you said, some hidden, very hard to catch problems?
Yeah, totally. We can maybe talk about it later and then go with the presentation, but you can also check out my assert module, where I'm much more strict about what you pipe in. So if you pipe in an array, with should it will do something weird. With assert it will throw an exception because it thinks that you are doing something that you shouldn't be doing or not expected to do. But yeah, the PowerShell is like dynamically scoped language, and it's loosely typed, and that's how the testing framework also works. So yeah. Where were we? Okay, so we did the test. It was super simple. If we look at it from like high point, 3,000 miles, you should see something like this. You put data in, you have expected data that will come out, and then you have a function in the middle that will transport them. And then if those things are the same, then your test should pass. Or not the same, equal. And so if you see this pattern, you can see that this pops up a lot. You can think about the in as just data and this as just data, because that's just pattern, just values. And then some function in the middle that will change the values in the way that you get the out. And this works great for anything that transforms any data. That's kind of a pure function. Now we have a task number 2. And that task number 2 is very similar. And it's this one. Yeah, right. So we need to convert the environment variable from this word NuGet version to the nice format that Jenkins expects, which is the snake case with uppercase. And what we can do here is just play with the words. It's again the same pattern: data in, data out, compare. So let's just do that. Format environment variable. This is how the function looks like. This is how the tests look like. Any takers? Someone wants to do some coding? Help me out. I'm just gonna run the test. And it doesn't run. Now it runs. So it says, I wanted A, B, C to be converted to A underscore B underscore C, but I got null. And it does the same thing for NuGet version, but it got null as well. So any thinking, anyone? Bartek, in your long hands.
I was just trying to write it in regex.
So just think about it. Just someone run me through what you're thinking right now. Should I choose? Who's looking in the ground the most? No, so I would, for example, start from looking at the capital letters and splitting on them. Right, that could be a solution. Maybe just find a capital letter in here, do split on it. That might be a first part. It also says that in the comments. So we just go with name, and then I do split, and then I split it on what? A to Z. That's regex, and maybe what join with underscore. At least that's what my comment says. That's probably what the senior person on the project told me. Just split on the words and just join it with underscore, and that's it. And I get just underscores. So how so? So the first problem is probably that the split is not case sensitive. So I will try to do it case sensitive, because now we just replaced every letter with underscore, and that's not what we wanted. Did I say? No? What?
And what is the result of the first test?
It's NuGet version, right? So now it works better. You solved it?
And one regular expression and two upper.
Cool. So tell me how you did it.
Okay, so I use zero place first,
Okay.
and then the regex pattern is zero length behind with lowercase character.
Oh, I'm not good.
Save you some embarrassment.
What? It's complicated.
Yeah, I know. It's my code, so it has to be complicated.
Yeah, I would write it in, but it works. So
Yeah.
I take your word for it. So maybe my solution for this is to just replace every capital letter with underscore and the capital letter. So I would do like A to Z, because I need to keep it. I know that I can have sub expressions, so I can do $1, and that should put me in the exact same position where I was at the start. So if I put underscore in front of it, then on every capital letter I will get underscore, the same letter. And so that gives me pretty close to the solution. And I don't need to do this like magic with backtracking. But the only problem now is that I have an extra underscore on the start, so then I can just take the result and just do trim start and just trim the underscore out, and now it passes. But it shouldn't, right? Because what we are getting here is NuGet version, NuGet underscore version, but it's not capitalized. We are never saying to upper. We can confirm that if we do a, Jesus. This is the result, and then I can just write host a. So if I run this test, we can see the actual values that we are getting back. And at first I didn't notice this bug, but then I was like, oh yeah, no to upper there. And it was during the presentation when I was doing it for the first time. So you also need to check your tests as well. If you get something unexpected, then just think, okay, this doesn't seem right. What am I doing wrong? It might be that your test is actually wrong, not your code. Well, in this case, both of them are wrong, but our test is broken because it doesn't see that we are doing something that we didn't want. So the solution to this is that should be is not case sensitive. So we need to make it case sensitive by saying be exactly. And then it will again highlight that we are doing something wrong. And so sometimes you need to go back to your test and make sure that it fails, because that's very important to see the test fail when you expect it to fail.
Never trust the test until you see
It fails.
Yeah, right.
Test your test.
Is that what Jeffrey Snower tweeted like 5 days ago?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we do to upper invariant, or just normal to upper if you want. And then we pass again, and now it should be a correct function. The test should be corrected, and so on. You can also add like a comment and say, this is why we want this. So you remember it, and then you just don't wonder, oh, why is this be exactly when exactly no other test is using be exactly. So let's go back to the presentation. Yeah.
So every time when you compare the case, you should use be exactly.
True.
And it also applies to types?
It doesn't apply to types because this doesn't really not check the types when it's B.
Okay.
So when you have string and array, it will fail, even though it's B. So this is just, it's historically called be exactly, but better assertion would probably be should be string case sensitive or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's backward compatibility, right? Or
It is, but the name is not very nice because it applies just to strings. So
just change the name and destroy all the tests.
yeah, I will do that.
The April's Fool.
How many people will thank you for that? You have no idea.
So
Yeah.
many.
Push a new version on the April's Fool.
I can just do it in version 5 now.
Yes, there you can do
Yeah,
that.
just if there is a new version coming, just do everything as best as it can be, and remove all the old.
That's really nice idea. Just do it correctly this time.
I mean, I'm not saying correctly, but if there are any kind of things which you could improve, but there will be some people from basement who will tell you and burn you because the test suddenly doesn't work out of the box. You should just tell them that you stop use version 4 and don't hold the progress.
Yeah, well, and I actually talked with the community about this, and they said they want the new features instead of the backwards compatibility
Yeah,
because it's
because
nicer,
when-
nicer way forward. So that's exactly what I will do. But there's also the problem that you can do so many changes that you introduce so many new bugs, and you like break the syntax, and then you realize, okay, this was a bad idea after all. But when you were trying to fix it, so yeah, it's a hard problem, and it's maybe better to make it more iterative and then just say, yeah, sorry, this is a breaking change after all, instead of just start changing everything in a way that you might think will be correct. It's difficult stuff. Yeah, what I wanted to actually show in this test is that we have test cases, so you can use the same body of the test and not repeat it 400 times when you have 400 examples that you want to test. So for example, here we have this NuGet version and NuGet version, and then we have ABC. And ABC, and if we figured out that the solution doesn't really work as we want for something, like if this was like maybe AA and small b and c, and we wanted to just capitalize on the first letter that's capital, but not every capital letter that follows after a first capital letter, then we would need to change the function and we would need to add an example. And so instead of just copying the whole test and writing the example inside of it, we can just add a hash table with value and expected. So this name, and this name needs to be the same so it injects correctly. But it's a nice thing to have data-driven tests, because then the body can stay the same and just be reused. Next task. Compose a version from git version, output, and date. It should look like this. So we have the version, the pre-release tag, then we have a date, and then we have the short hash. So the short hash we already created. The date we can get from getDate version, and the beta, the suffix we can get from git version. So looking at this, that should be this file and that file. And here we are using mocks for the first time because I have getDate, and getDate is very unstable. It changes all the time, and it just gives you
Unstable. That's my favorite.
gives you a different date every time you ask. And so we need to stabilize it somehow. We need to tell it, oh, when we ask about date, this is the date that we want. Because we don't care, we just need to format it correctly. And so running the test, it fails. It says, oh, I got null again. But I have this getDate that you can see that just returns a datetime object. One thing that you might want to do is to go in here and just call it getDate and just define the date, but then it will pick up the mock again and it will just loop forever and your test would get stuck, which sucks. You can do it differently. You can say like the date command is get date, and the command type is commandlet. And then it will pick up reference to the getDate, and then you can like invoke it like this. But we have another way of producing a date, and that's just through the constructor of the actual data type that it will return. So we are using that, but this is a useful practice if you need to intercept some data or if you need to just use it to format it for you maybe. Did you want to take a note?
Yeah.
You done? It will be in the video though.
Maybe.
So we run it, we are still getting null, so we just need to compose it here, and so I just say, that's the version plus the short hash, so that can be version dot date plus short hash. And let's hope that works. It doesn't because I'm doing it wrong. Right, so from this we need to get, what is it? This one? Right, that should get us closer. And then we need pre-release tag, which will be dash dollar version. Put this in here.
I think you converted the short hash back to just
Yeah, true.
Branch name. Left the
Are we
branch.
importing it? Yeah, we do. So this one, join. Those tests pass. So
I think you're missing the branch name.
I am I?
The one of data.
No, that's the pre-release tag. But it could also be the branch because here is the same. So yeah, no, thank you. It works now. Pretty much what we did here is just put the strings together, and I'm looking at both of the same files. So I just concatenated the strings together, put the signs in the middle, the pluses and the minuses and the dots. But what happened here is that I had multiple external dependencies that were unstable and that I didn't want to really think about. So one of them is this git version tool that just looks at the repository, gives you information, but to be able to set it up, you would have to create a repository, put it into the correct state, just to be able to get this JSON out of it. So you do it once, you run it, you grab the output, you save it, or put it in your test, and then you can just reuse it. Until git version changes, it will be correct. Then we have getDate, which changes all the time. We need to stabilize it as well. So we create another mock, and then we say, this is what we expect. This is what we get from the function when we are in the current state. And so that's it. That's the pattern. So we stabilize the dependencies. If you look at it again from airplane, you will see that we have a mock, we have a function, and then we have some output that we can check. So if we have some difficult dependencies that we need to deal with, like Active Directory or getDate or getRandom maybe, then we can do it this way. Now to the next task, building a Docker image. So there I again need to reach out to a tool, and I believe that the tool works correctly. I just need to call it correctly. So this would be the function that I have, and those are the tests. If I run them, they fail, and they told me I expected build Docker image to be called 1 times, but it was called 0 times. So why is that? Because I never call it, right? That's exactly what the error says, so we need to fix that. I'm just gonna close everything else. Let's do this. And so looking again at the test, we have a few mocks where we stabilize this get version that we just fixed, just to return us the correct string. Then we are mocking build Docker image, giving it a default mock that will apply every time if we don't have another mock that has better parameter filter. So this just prevents us from calling the real command. And then we have a worker mock that will actually do the work, and it will check, like, if I'm calling it with a tag that is equal to this, and I'm calling it with a path that's equal to dot, then just be called and don't do anything else, because we don't specify any behavior for this. We just need to count it differently. We could also do it the other way around without using this mock at all, but I just thought this will show the example a bit better. And then we call this new Docker image that you can see we are not mentioning anywhere here. But we want the build Docker image to be called inside of the new Docker image. And then we are making sure that the build Docker image was called exactly 1 times with those parameters. So jumping onto that, that's exactly what we need to do. So we need to do build Docker image, call it with the tag that we already built, and then we need to call it with the path that we are providing. Running those tests, and they pass. But you can see that I have a note here that says, oh, we didn't pass the path inside of the get version. And that's a problem because we are mocking get version, and it just does the same thing all the time. So it's harder for us to detect that we actually have a bug in here, and we are not passing the path that would otherwise need it to be passed. So you can either force the parameter to be mandatory, or you can then run it in production and see it fail and write another test or refine this one. Those are a few options. It's just to highlight the point that mocks are something that prevents us from seeing how it will work in the real world, but on the other hand, they prevent us from requiring the real world dependencies to be set up. So it's a trade-off between fidelity and ease of testing.
So, and why do you mock the same function twice?
Here?
Yeah.
So here, this one will be executed every time if we don't specify the correct parameters. We wouldn't have to do it, and that's a good question. It would be more useful if we had something that would be destructive, like remove item, or I don't know, what's very destructive, like shut down computer, something like that. So you don't want to call it by accident when your code is incorrect. You want to have something that is faking the function, so you are not turning off your computer or removing the item in the middle of your test just because your code was wrong.
And the second one is just with those parameters?
Yes, so it should actually work if I delete it, because it doesn't have any behavior. Yeah, so internally Pester is tracking with which parameters you are calling the mocks. So in this case, we would be always calling this one. And then we just look at the history of the calls and we filter them based on this predicate. So we say, we have some table of parameters that were used based on each call, and then we filter them and we want to see that this was done exactly once.
Then you would use the same parameters in assert mock code parameter editor.
What's the question?
Then you would in assert mock code you would have to use the same parameters.
Yeah, so the second mock that I had was actually not necessary. I'm not sure what I was trying to show there. But you can have multiple types of mocks. So for example, if this mock was here and I wanted to say, if I call just this command and I want to protect myself from turning off my computer, I would call mock shutdown computer. And then when I call it with some parameters, I wanted to do something differently, maybe like write a message or something like that. Then I would have two different behaviors. One would be protecting me from doing something destructive, and the other one would be doing what the test wants it or expects it to do. And then that's where the parameter filter on the mock would be useful. But in this case, I'm only checking if I called it with the correct parameters. So here I don't need two different behaviors. I can do with just one mock. And then I just inspect the history, how they were called, and select the correct call that I expect. So this helps me say, when you call this build Docker image, you must call it with those parameters. Otherwise, the test will fail. So if I go here and I say something weird, it should fail the test. Because it says, I expected this to be called one time with those parameters, but you never called it with those parameters. So I need to fix it and put it back to path, and then it should pass again. Did that help?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Question. When you define the mock, you don't have to define it as something that returns empty script block or something like this?
No.
That's by default?
Yes.
Okay.
You just have to define the name of the function, and that's it. But I usually define it anyway, because I'm just used to having it look like that, so I usually have it like this.
Okay, thanks.
And so this was kind of error prone, and as I said before, if we don't call it with the correct parameters and we do some errors in the code, then we won't be able to detect them if we are using mocks to replace those calls, because they add seams, so you can replace real life dependencies, but they also reduce fidelity of the actual behavior, because it might not be the same as in the real world. So it's a trade-off that you need to take. But what we did is that we verified a behavior, so we have a part of the system that we believe will work correctly if we call it with the correct parameters. So we don't need to test this part of the system, we just need to test that we are calling it correctly, and that's the behavior. So we just say the function will do this, and we verify it by a certain mock call with the correct parameter filter. And the pattern for that would be this: some data in, and function that's calling a mock, and then we need a cert mock called. And the last thing here is some discovery tests. So discovery tests will help you to make sure that the dependency that you are replacing or checking is working as you expect. And it also can help you in the future with making sure that the new version of the dependency works the same way as the previous one. So this one, for example, I have those tests that will create a real repository. It will commit something. It will call git version on it, take the JSON output and check if the major minor patch is correct. And then I will add a tag into the commit or onto the commit, and I will check that the major minor patch changed to the tag, because that's what git version promises to do. And that's what I'm checking. And it doesn't work. Why? Let's try one more time. Maybe it fixes itself. No. Missing a dependency, maybe. No. Where are we? Worked this morning. Anyways, if this worked, then we would have the dependency, we would have it described in the test, and we would be able to see when we upgrade the version that something changed and it doesn't behave as it did before. So there is some minor bug. If someone sees it, then you can correct me. But that's what I'm trying to do here, to describe the dependency so I know how it works. And so that way we can stabilize this external dependency. For this Git version, maybe not that important, but maybe if you have like an API that you are heavily consuming, then maybe running some tests against the real API once in a while if the provider of the API is not really working on backwards compatibility and making sure that the API is stable, that might be a good option. And that also might be like something like environment testing. So pattern for that would look like this. Something goes in, then we have the dependency that we want to stabilize, and then something goes out. So that should be what you learned. So there are only a few shapes of tests. Once you start seeing them in your tests, you will be able to see how to actually test them, how to handle them, and you will know that you are right in testing them that way. Use mocks cautiously, because they really can break your tests, then you just deploy into production and nothing works.
Sometimes you end up testing your mocks instead of testing your code.
Yeah, or you end up just testing your mocks instead of testing the real code. But also experiment and have fun, because it's just PowerShell in the end. If you want the code, you can find it in my repo. It's public, not with the changes that I made here, but all the examples are there complete. And so you can go back, you can check out what the solutions I have are, and yeah, that's it. So questions? I have like 2 power banks if someone wants to ask a question.
Can you tell us about mocking output from like a specific output that you at first you output it to CLI XML, and then you use it to for mocking import the XML.
Okay, so something like get process that would go into, is that export? Export. Well, that would be slow. So this command would just give us all the current processes in the computer and save it into an XML. And so that gives us a snapshot at exactly the moment that when I run the command. And so we know this is exactly what the system would do when I would run the command, but it's just snapshotted to this one moment, right? And then we can do the same thing and just load it. So that would be import CLI XML from this path.
Yeah, and you use it in mock, for example, for mocking that process, right?
Yeah, and so now that we have this snapshot, we can import it via this, and then we can also say, I'm mocking get process. So when I do that, then just return this thing. XML. And it will, what? I'm just gonna say should get process should be null. So this is a very stupid test, but it just says that when you call get process, you will get exactly the output that you got before when you run it. And this way you can use it to like fake out complex dependencies in a very nice manner.
Except if you are actually testing something that has to use the type name process, it will be, I think, serialized or deserialized.
Okay, so yeah, the output from this, we can actually check that.
So it's going to be different type for sure.
Yeah. So that's
That actually makes mocking the PowerShell remoting sessions impossible for some commands.
That's a PSosh normally. It's a different type. Yeah, so the note here is that if we do this serialization, then what we get, the type of the object, is not the same as what we would get if we call the command correctly. That's totally true. And
Is there a way around?
there's, like, if you want to compare the types, there's kind of no way to tell it, no, this is the same type, because that's simply how the framework works. Because,
Well, you can lie to it that it's a different type for sure.
yeah,
I'm doing it all the time.
can you? How?
So basically you just, because most of the commands, you just check the PS type names and they compare. So when you just to say that this is just PS custom object with the PS type name process fee, then it just works.
Okay, so it's,
Except for the partial sessions where they're really doing something nasty and it's not working, so then you have to stop. Basically, sometimes you can just create stop commands that will just not expect input of the given type, so they will be just kind of like more loose than normal, and then when you mock it, then the type is not really wide anymore. So you can turn it into like requiring object. It's especially useful when you have all those sim commandlet like modules. So like disk, SMB, share, those modules are really picky about the types, and when you try to mock those commands, God help you.
okay, so just to sum it up for the stream, if you are actually checking the types against each other, then the deserialized type is different from the type that the command would actually return. So if you are able to lie to it and use the PS type name and it will actually pass, that will be your first option.
Yeah.
But in many cases it doesn't work because that's where the actual comparing of the real types that .NET does would come in, and there you cannot fake it without using something like moles or something, or facts. But that's not what we normally use in PowerShell, and it's probably super difficult to do. But if your problem is from the other way around, that you are trying to push data into a command that's expecting a type of a different command, a different type, and the thing that you're pushing into is an actual mock, then now we have new options in mock where you can say relax type and relax validation. So you can say this parameter, even though it normally expects like a virtual machine, it will have no type, it will have object, or it expects range between 1 and 10, and you just remove the validation parameter from the mock. So that was like recent addition that I didn't write, but yeah, Rene Hernandez brought it.
Very involved, hearing about it.
It's really, really nice, I think. So yeah, any other questions? Do you want your power bank?
Sure.
I have one more.
So what are the most common examples, user cases for tests? What I'm thinking is like getting the files from file system, getting the content of the files, connecting, using something like invoke REST method or invoke web request, or even the Git commands, which could get some information from remote repository, but it's not a PowerShell command. How about some creation of the custom object? Is this also valid use case for Pester tests?
I was asking which types of tests people have, and they have all of those that you named and way more. So it's used for pretty much everything. In validating your environments, checking databases through DBA checks, checking VMware, I think, deployments, checking deployments via Chef and Terraform, and so on, and also like unit testing all of those things that you said, like loading files, saving files. That's why we have test drive, so you can do that easily. We also have registry drive now, if you don't know, and so on. So yeah, pretty much.
Registry drive is built in.
Yeah, it's now there, so you can do test registry drive, I think, and then you can just test against registry on Windows, of course. And so on. So yeah, if there's like a big need for something, I'm trying to cater it, but people usually find nice workarounds that they can use themselves as well. There is no typical Pester test that I could tell you.
You will see in a few minutes how unusual tests can be.
See?
Any GUI related tests?
I
Think
tried
about
it a few
Windows
times,
Forms
but
and the basic usage of the WPF.
yeah, that's probably difficult,
Yeah.
very difficult. Anything else? Oh, here's your power bank, by the way.
Thanks, man.
Enjoy. There are also some stickers and some other swag if you want. So with that, that's all.
I have a question.
Oh, you have?
Can you tell a few words about the asset module?
The assert module. Okay. So the assert module is a small module that I wrote a while ago, and it pretty much tries to solve all the problems with should without breaking the backwards compatibility of should. So it's a module that you take and you can use it with Pester, or you can use it alone. It just throws exceptions when the sites are not the same. And so kind of what it tries to solve is, well, described in the issues. And it also tries to bring some really nice features like comparing call objects. So for example, what I was saying before is be exactly is really bad name for the assertion because it applies to any type. So I was trying to solve it here with some specialized assertions. I'm not sure how successful I was, but pretty much normally you would say hello, assert equal expected hello, and it would work as you expect. But once you want to get based on this type into more details, for example, say hello string equal expected hello, but it's case sensitive, or it ignores white space, or it, I don't know, matches some pattern or something, then it's not really nice to just mash everything into assert equal because you don't have any good way to express it, because in here you have no idea what's coming from this side, and you cannot change the parameters based on the type of this thing. So that's one thing that I tried to solve. Another thing was more helpful failure messages, but some of those ideas I'm also bringing into Pester, like filtering and showing the arrays in a nicer way. But pretty much what I tried to go with is something like, I expected all the items in this collection to like pass this filter, but 3 of them, and you have them named here, didn't pass the filter. And so then you can see exactly what happened and so on. And then the last thing, the important thing here was comparing whole object. So I would have something like this, like 2 objects that have the same properties with similar values. And I would say, I want those 2 objects to be the same. Like you have REST API, you get a response, it has some data in it, and you want to compare it against something that you already have as an expected. So you can say, here are 5 assertions that will compare it, but instead what you also can say is, here is an object that looks like what I want, and just tell me if the other object has the same properties and so on. And it gives you this nice summary that says, expected this name to be Jakub, but it was just JKB. Expected the age, but the other object doesn't have it, and the collections are also different because it goes recursively through all the types. What you can also now say is that you say, I only want to check the stuff that's on expected. So if you then have object that will grow, you don't have to go and do maintenance in your tests. You just say, this is the expectation that I have. If the object has anything else, I don't really care. Just check the stuff that I expect and not anything else.
You said you can use that without Pester, so does Pester by default load your module asset?
No, you will have to install it from the PowerShell gallery. But yeah, it's just install module, insert Pester, and that's it. Yeah, so if there are any takers or anyone who wants to maintain it or uses it in production, then there are issues. I can help solve them. There are pull requests, so yeah. And then maybe, hopefully in the future, it will be merged into Pester as well. I don't know. Good question. I don't have any more power banks, but you can have mints and stickers.
Stickers.
So stickers are there. This is everything that I have, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I think I'm gonna take a short break right now. The pizza will be like half an hour, so we can either get half your session or just stick around, or have full session and the pizza will wait, and then we can go for. Not that bad. I think they're gonna be late as usual. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Jakub. You already pulled away. Thank you for the session. I think there will be more talk after this. I have some questions for you offline. But thank you, and thank you guys. Just 5-minute break to get some drinks, get some snacks, and we'll back in track.
Ja, nie chcesz jabłka do drogi? Nie, to